Welcome to our panel on higher ed disruptors. This is, I think, the last panel of the day, I believe, so let's keep our energy up. It's really nice to see everybody here. We have an incredible panel. My name is Alex Sarlin. I'm the founder of the EdTech Insiders podcast, and I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. It's really an amazing group. Why don't we start at the end with Abha?
Hello. All right. Hi, my name is Abha Ahuja. I am an academic program director at Minerva Project. I'll tell you a little bit about Minerva as well. All right, excellent. Minerva Project partners with high schools and universities globally, helping them to transform their education programs through interdisciplinary curriculum, pedagogy, and our virtual learning platform. I oversee program design and delivery at Minerva. I'm trained as a scientist, so I began my career in the classroom designing and delivering life sciences curriculum.
Terrific. Kevin?
I'm Kevin Harrington, co-founder and CEO of Rize Education. We're an inter-college OPM that enables colleges to add high-demand majors, minor certificates with no upfront investment, low fixed costs on a mostly variable cost basis that tries to make high-skill, high-demand programming ubiquitous throughout higher ed in a much lower cost model. We work with about 80 four-year private colleges across the country right now. Before coming over to the light side of education, I worked at the Blackstone Group in real estate private equity, but I have been here for about 3 years now.
Great. Jack?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Hi, Jack Hylands, the co-founders and co-CEOs of FourthRev. We're an organisation which was founded in Melbourne and team now across Australia, South Africa, and I'm based in London in the UK. We partner with leading universities and global technology companies to co-create programs for adults and lifelong learners that lead directly to career outcomes in the digital economy.
Perfect. Gauthier?
Hey everyone, my name is Gauthier. I'm from Belgium originally, and I'm the co-founder of a company called Perlego. And Perlego was basically built out of a personal pain point of mine, which was very expensive price of textbooks. So in simple, some people have kind of branded us as the Netflix or Spotify for textbooks. Basically, for students, you can find all your content in one simple space.
Perfect. So I think this is a really good segue to our first question, which is going to go right to the heart of disruption. I'd like to ask each panelist to talk about what part of the higher education system is broken right now and what your company is doing to really pave a path to a meaningful, scalable alternative. Let's go the same order here. Abha, please.
Sure. The biggest problem that we're thinking about is that the way we teach just is not working. Students don't remember what they learned in a course 6 months later. Employers are asking for students to have really those foundational skills. And on a personal note, I was in the classroom. I would spend hours polishing my lectures, writing slide decks, and frankly, students were half asleep. And so I made changes to my courses, but it became clear to me that this is not something that can be solved at the level of individual instructors. We need to make some systemic transformation, some foundational changes. And so Minerva's approach really is research-backed, right? We really dug into the science of learning, the evidence behind what works in teaching and learning. The first approach that we have is fully active learning. We really train our instructors to teach in a way where students are engaging with content, where students are engaging with their peers, where students are engaging with their instructors. The second piece is our curriculum. We have a scaffolded curriculum where students have opportunities to apply their learning repeatedly in different contexts. And the science tells us this is what works. This is what helps the learning to become engraved. And what's really exciting is that we've figured out a scalable way to do this, and we are supporting institutions in doing this at a very scalable way at an institutional level.
Yeah. Scaling good instructional design, which is lacking in too many of our higher ed institutions. Kevin?
Yeah, not easy to do. The problem we're trying to solve is really just that the traditional academic programming model of higher ed feels miserably broken. It's obviously far too costly, for most colleges, even small colleges, to start a new major, minor, even a certificate in something like supply chain management, a critical skill for the modern economy, requires hundreds of thousands in upfront investment, fixed costs that are largely irreversible, regardless of whether you're getting 1 or 100, enrollments into that program, meaning that it produces deficits in perpetuity, almost inevitably. Because of that, not only are you leading to higher tuition for students, but really that risk profile of that investment for a school prevents most colleges from adding most of the skill sets that the modern economy requires of graduates. And so how we try to tackle that is by bringing a more collaborative academic programming model that allows these schools to adopt new majors, minors, certificates in a purely variable cost fashion where they're producing a surplus and almost guaranteed, in year 1 of having that academic program. We do that by acting as sort of an inter-college OPM where we sort of latch ourselves on to an existing supply chain management program and an existing 4-year institution and just kind of put it on steroids where we bring it online and scale it out to any other college in the country who wants to add those incremental classes to their curriculum, allowing those other colleges to create certificates, minors, majors, whatever they want, on top of those classes in their existing curriculum, where those courses are now their own. Students take them for credits. They, pay the same tuition they would for any other course, but they're in an online section of 30 students or less. The other 29 kids might be from 29 other colleges all over the country. Really allowing colleges to start new programs for no upfront investment and no risk, trying to make, every skill that's essential to our learners today ubiquitous throughout higher ed or really in any institutions who want to add them.
Right. So if I can paraphrase, so right now universities have to invest in each of their departments and some are much higher demand than others, but they all are packaged together. This allows them to disaggregate and offer majors or minors or certificates in a variable way based on demand.
Much better said than I did, yeah.
That's great.
Perfect.
That's great. Jack?
Look forward to you paraphrasing me as well, Alex. I suppose the critical challenge that we're focused on is the digital skills gap brought about by rapid digital transformation across the economy. And so for education providers, for educators, we've always struggled to keep pace with new technologies, but in the modern digital economy, that pace of change is ever accelerating and that problem affecting ever more learners as they look for those career outcomes. And to better serve those learners, it's up-to-date industry-relevant content and curriculum, it's applied learning and demonstrable skills and capabilities that can be provided to prospective employers to really support them into those high growth career pathways that we know the economy needs so greatly and individuals can thrive within. And so we still see universities as the primary pathway into the professions, but FourthRev partners with those universities, bringing our industry and technology partners also into these collaborations. So we work with the likes of Tableau, Microsoft, GitHub, Salesforce, and a whole host of employer partners within those ecosystems. And then we co-create courses with fantastic universities such as our partner LSE, who's here in the audience, to really offer learners that best of both worlds, so they still get that rigorous, high-quality education and higher-order capability development that you associate with a great university education, but they also get the up-to-date, industry-relevant skills, access to new tools and technologies, and connections to career outcomes through our employer partners and careers network.
Fantastic. Do you want me to paraphrase you? That was great. But problem is universities don't know how to deliver relevant content, and they're addressing it in a really interesting way. Gauthier.
Yeah, so I think we're solving for two problems. On the student side, textbooks are incredibly expensive, right? There's a famous stat where people claim that textbook prices have increased by more than 847% since 1982, or 3 times the rate of inflation. So on the student side, it's providing accessibility, convenience, all in one simple space. But the other problem is for publishers. And publishers lose a ton of money due to piracy, so students downloading content illegally because they find the content too expensive. And then a huge issue for publishers as well is cannibalization in the secondhand book market. So on the one side, you're providing affordability and convenience for the student. On the other side, you're helping your publishing partners recuperate revenue from piracy and mitigate the secondhand book market. So it's a win-win for both sides of the model.
Terrific. All right, so now that we've got a good idea of what each of these companies does to disrupt the system, we're going to ask a little bit of an interesting, I think it's an interesting question that all of these folks have thought about a lot. So you all do what we could call disruption, and when we think about disruption through the sort of classic model, it's the big, slow giants, and then the fast, agile people come in and eat their lunch. It's the classic Clayton Christensen. But in fact, all four of you partner very closely with the organizations that would be the disruptees. It's universities for the three of you, and it's publishers for you. I'd love to hear what that's like, because I think maybe disruption is really the wrong word in this case. I saw you bristle when I said universities don't teach relevant content, because that's not at all how you feel. You say employers can teach one thing, universities can teach a different thing, and you get the best of both worlds if you work together. I'd love to hear the role of partnership between the disruptee and the disruptor. Jack, let me start with you there.
Yeah, sure. No, absolutely. We've created FourthRev to fundamentally rely on a partnership model, and everything that we build is in collaboration with universities, and we truly believe that can give the best solution through to learners, and something that's truly differentiated from something that a private provider could offer alone. I think, from my experience, journalists and a lot of investors at a conference like this, they quite like binary narratives, and it's either universities or the system is going to stay as it is and be slow and cumbersome and never change, or it's all going to be burnt to the ground and be, fundamentally replaced by some fantastic SaaS-based subscription model that means universities will no longer exist. Like most things, the reality is probably somewhere in the middle, and I think that, as they always have, universities will adapt and evolve to better meet the needs of the economy and the society within which they're in. And it's through, if they're going to be providing education to an ever greater number of people, that's an ever more diverse audience, which is what we hope, they're going to need to have an ever greater variety of offerings and solutions to meet those individual personalized needs. And so our solution, working with our partners, we believe can add real value for our audience, but that obviously won't be a complete solution for everyone, and universities will find their different paths.
I'm going to go this way because I think you have a different set. Wait, just hold on one second. So, Kevin, can you talk about Rize Academy and how you partner with universities?
Absolutely, yeah. So very similar opinions to Jack here. We think education, and specifically higher ed, is pretty unique as it pertains to disruption, just in that these existing institutions, these existing incumbents, are extremely defensible relative to the incumbents of other industries, mostly based on their credentials, and which really play a market facilitation role, and their campuses. Both of which are extremely high margin, very defensible businesses that are extremely difficult to replicate. You'd need generations of donors, millions of dollars, nonprofit status, all these things. Where really the core of the value prop, or really value props of higher ed, lie on top of, the best friendships for life, 4 of the best years of your life, the ability to get a credential that helps you get your first job. Whereas really the third sort of piece of the higher ed stack, namely, in classroom education, is only a very small portion of the true, value props of higher education. Accounts for about 50% of the operating costs of most colleges we work with, and yet is the least differentiated, lowest margin, least defensible part of sort of the 3 things that higher ed does. And so I think our colleges are starting to realize, really forced by demographic shifts and declining market share, that in order to become the college of the future, for those of them that do want to be innovative and do want to lean toward, they're going to need to become hybrid campuses where they really double down on their credential, their campus. That's the heart of what they do. That's truly unique to what the internet can provide, or any SaaS provider could provide, while continuing to collaborate more and more and outsource more and more of that core educational in-classroom experience to really bring tuition down dramatically and offer ubiquitous skills training.
Please.
Yeah, and just picking up on that, at Minerva, we are looking for institutions that want to innovate. We are partnering with institutions that want to transform, that want to make an impact on society. One example that I can share is we work in a partnership with the University of Southern California, Annenberg School of Communication. And they wanted to be the leaders, really, in addressing some of the challenges around diversity, equity, and inclusion that the media is facing at large. And so what we're doing with them is working very closely and collaborating on developing a skills-based curriculum. So this is not your compliance, box-checking exercise, but really a curriculum where their communications professionals, their students are engaging deeply with these issues currently with an eye on skills and curriculum that will prepare them for future challenges and really deeply engage with these issues, not just passively listen.
And finally, you have a very different model. So
Yeah, so we also work with universities. We have a lot of university clients as well. But I think, we all talk about disruption, but I think a big thing to talk about is maybe driving more efficiency and efficacy. So to give you an example, ultimately, Perlego's disruption is in the distribution model. You don't have to pay for print, distribution, wholesale printing costs, a win-win model for the student and win-win model for the publishers. But we also work with a ton of faculty. So what we're noticing now is a big issue for professors or academics is a lot of students don't do the pre-reading ahead of class. And as a digital product, you can see how people, everything's anonymized, of course, are interacting with video content, audio content, driving better learning outcomes as well. So as much as I think disruption and we can talk about the flawed model and the broken model in higher ed, I think there's some great things, and I think it's about driving more efficient outcomes and things that work really well instead of just disrupting the whole thing.
yeah, I apologize. I didn't realize you worked with universities as well, but that's very interesting. Great answers across the board. And I think just a quick survey of the audience: how many people here work within a higher ed institution? Okay. About half, almost half. Great. I'm start thinking about questions for these folks for the end of this session, because I think the relationship between these, quote unquote disruptors / partners in higher ed is really going to define the future of higher ed. I want to talk about accreditation. It was mentioned briefly, but accreditation is one of the systemic elements of the higher ed system that really does not change very quickly. It's a major part of especially U.S. higher ed, but also in Europe, that is part of what disallows people to enter this space in an easy way. It's very expensive. It takes a long time. It's very rigid. I'd love to hear each of you talk about how accreditation affects your business model, how you think about it. Is it something that you aspire to? Is it something you maybe want to subvert and offer alternative credentials? How do you think about that space? Gauthier, do you want to start?
Sure. So if I think about my own kind of university experience, I think ultimately you go to university today for maybe 3-4 things. The brand, the quality of your professors, to make friends, and to have a great, for me, there was a lot about my peers in my classroom. But through Perlego, the way I think about accreditation is, if I look in our company today, we're 130, and I'd say maybe 60, 70 people. Some of our software engineers never went to university, and I don't think necessarily you need to have a university degree nowadays. It's not as important, but there's some great assets of having one. But for me, I think you shouldn't focus on just on having the degree for a career.
You're on the side of not necessarily playing within the existing accreditation system. There may be good, worthy alternatives.
Exactly. So, one thing I think about for us, it's all about, ultimately we want a mission to make educational content more affordable. Now, imagine if you can collaborate, see what your professors have highlighted, annotated. You can work with the best professors in the world, seeing what content they're suggesting. That's another great way to democratize university learning. So you don't necessarily have to go to that university to learn what other people are learning at that university.
Very interesting. How about you, Jack? How do you think about accreditation with FourthRev?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very interesting question, in the sense that when people think of higher ed and you're talking to people about working in higher ed, there's still an assumption that you work with 18 to 21-year-olds local, whereas for most universities here in particular, but in general now thinking 16 to 65 and global. And so for that very diverse audience, accreditation, I think, for their programming will have differing value. And so with our Career Accelerator offerings, which is very much targeted on a adult learner audience, we've been able to launch those rapidly to market in the alternative credential space because, as you say, accreditation is a slower pathway to market. Having said that, we believe that accreditation is still offering a lot of value to individuals as an indicator to the market, and is still resulting in career outcomes. And it's also a space where universities or the higher education system can offer differentiated value that is, defensible, as you say, from private bootcamp providers or others. So we sort of see that pathway, but some of the challenges that it brings in, we're talking about the ever-changing nature of the digital economy. If it takes 3, 4, 5 years to get curriculum to market, then that's self-defeating in terms of the outcomes that we're trying to drive for students and their capabilities. And also, if it's it's got to be a 2-year program to be worthy of a master's degree, or it's got to be 3 or 4 years of a bachelor's degree, and actually you're dealing with a modern learning audience that want something that's shorter, sharper, that's more clearly focused on a shorter term time horizon, then there is a real need for us to be able to think about these things in a more innovative way. Often that means operating outside of accreditation frameworks. I hope, and I think it would be really valuable for individuals and for society at large, then we can work to more stackable models where there is greater flexibility that might still build towards qualifications that are well understood and well known by the market, and that's where their value lies, but accreditation frameworks that allow us to get things to market quicker. My previous employer, RMIT University in Australia, we're actually getting things accredited in 6 to 8 weeks, new courses, new programs. It is possible. A lot of it is actually internal process and approach from institutions rather than regulatory, and obviously that will vary across the geography and the rules in that state.
It's very interesting.
I think a lot of us in the room are probably pretty jealous of 6 to 8 weeks for accreditation. That's mind-boggling. Accreditation is probably the single biggest reason for why Rize operates much more as an inter-college, service provider rather than trying to teach directly into colleges as a private company, and why we think that approach is much, empowering universities to teach amongst themselves and bringing the best of Edtech to them rather than trying to teach into them as some Silicon Valley startup is a much better approach. That being, and probably why the future, we think of higher ed becoming much lower cost and much more accessible, lies in sort of a shared educational layer that's only partially centralized and much less like a Coursera or something teaching, most of the classes into colleges. At the same time, though, if you're trying to create the colleges of the future, whatever that means, I think accreditation is really only one of many challenges that lie between someone starting that college in the future and that future institution. You have to somehow figure out if you're gonna compete with the bulk of the market, figure out how to create the experiences, meeting your best friends for life, creating a dense network of peers, devoted alumni, and all that comes with that, along with the trust of employers, the trust of parents, in what is a brutally difficult chicken and egg marketplace problem of really like these two sides, trusting one central facilitator with the credentialing of the labor market. And so I think that's why we're much more bullish on the colleges of the future being our existing colleges, who for the first time ever are under enough pressure that they're going to need to have to change, become much more hybrid. Not only because the accreditation and the rigidity of it, but also because of all these other obstacles that make existing incumbents so defensible. And so that's why we work with existing institutions to create that model of the future rather than trying to come at them from the outside.
Abha, how about you?
Yeah, accreditation is important and adds value, and we've had, it's an important part of our business model. We've been creative, similar to what you've been talking about. For those of you who might not know, our flagship partner at Minerva Project is Minerva University. It's an undergraduate and master's granting organization. And we initially incubated under Keck Graduate Institute, and now we recently are now fully independently accredited by WASC. So that was one approach towards accreditation. Another example that I can give you is we are currently partnering with Al Zayed University in the United Arab Emirates, a highly regulated environment in the Gulf there. And so this year, the fall of 21, we launched a pilot program with approval from their local regulatory agency, accreditation agency, an interdisciplinary college, very different from what they currently have. We're running the pilot right now, And based on the outcomes that we're seeing from that pilot, we are now working with the accreditors to fully transform the university into an interdisciplinary program. So far, accreditors have been good to us because a lot of what we do is backed by the research. We've been able to show them that it works, but we have to get creative.
Alex, one thing I'd perhaps like to add is, I think undeniably it's a huge problem at undergraduate level where that speed of change of curriculum, particularly in the areas that the economy needs most greatly, in the digital skill space, in the technology engineering space, and where you've got students that are learning a technology that's completely out of date for the needs of employers, but it meets accreditation standards because it's meeting certain academic frameworks. That to me seems like a system which obviously isn't working very, very well. And actually bringing into these accreditation frameworks, there should also be a focus on making sure that the content and curriculum is up to date and rigorous and leading to those career outcomes. And you see that in sort of other educational frameworks, but it hasn't really been at the core of the higher education offering. But as a greater pressure on higher education institutions to deliver those career outcomes comes to the fore, then yeah, we need to see more of that in the rigor and analysis that's put on the courses that are being put in front of students.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think those were all great points, and it's so interesting to me how you all have very different approaches to this. You say professors should be able to work outside of the system and alternative credentials. There's value to credit, but to stay very flexible, to offer shorter programs. You can't do them on time with credit. Allow universities to share accreditation with one another. One university accredits and others can use the same system. And Minerva has a version of that as well. Minerva is a fully accredited university and works to make accredited systems. So all different, I think, very reasonable responses to a complex system. And we don't know where it's going to go. One thing that struck me as I chatted with each of you is that you all have some really personal experiences that sort of led you to create these companies. And I thought, I thought it was worth jumping into. You mentioned the textbook costs. You've lived in student housing to think about this stuff. I wanted to just go around and, I think everybody has this, but because you're doing these really interesting disruptive work, I'd love to tell you to just tell the audience a little bit about that. What about your story led you to these ideas and to making them happen? Gauthier, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So ultimately, mine was really just from a personal pain point where I would buy an accounting book worth $200-300. I'd read 2 chapters of the book and never use it again. And I wasn't just learning off textbook material either. So I'd learn off video content, maybe other resources. And there wasn't this one simple space where I could aggregate everything. So what we've done as a first layer is aggregate academic content, those very expensive textbooks. And now we're kind of becoming an aggregator of all your learning content, from slides, lecture notes, to essays, and really providing that convenience. So just really, it was a personal pain point, and nothing existed of the like.
Making the solution you wish you had in university. How about you, Jack?
Yeah, well, so I grew up in sort of New Labour era UK, where the policy was very much trying to get 50% of the population to university becoming the mass solution for all pathways to success and kind of the end point of success as well. That was the experience whilst at school. I then became a teacher, and again, the focus was how do you get people the qualifications that they need in order to get to university, and university being, they get there, that is what success looks like. And then actually starting to understand the system more and engaging with universities more and realizing that getting to university isn't always translating into the career outcomes or the life outcomes that people want, whilst cost of education is going up, and that differentiation in the marketplace of employment going down, arguably. And so the real driver for me has been around, I've been in the online education space for the last 10 years, partly because that's where you're able to innovate the most with universities, but the core hasn't really been around offering things online. It's more around how can we innovate what people are learning, what that experience is, so we can translate those outcomes into careers in the way that we'd hope to see them. And getting to university is just one pathway to success, but let's make sure it actually translates into those outcomes that people went there to achieve in the first place.
How about you, Kevin?
Yeah, my co-founder and I were both working Wall Street sort of bulge bracket jobs, as many sort of like former college athletes do, very unthinkingly, and just found it deeply unfulfilling. And our road to higher ed was not really strategic at all. It was mostly just trying to figure out like what problem could we attach ourselves to fill that gap in our lives that that Wall Street had seemed to create coming out of college, where things made a lot more sense and there was a much clearer path. And that's when we met President Jeff Docking of Adrian College, who's our partner in this venture, who sort of convinced us, partially because his pitch was very good, but partially also because we were desperate for something new, to move to Adrian College and sort of live in student housing, work in the administration building down the hall from him, eat in the D hall for 2 years to really understand the business model of these schools, all of whom are very different. And really figure out like what a new academic programming model could look like. So, yeah.
Abha, how about you?
Yeah, I started talking about this a little bit earlier. I started as an educator in the classroom. I am a scientist, and so when I was hitting the wall in my classroom, when I was looking at my students, I knew the answer lay in the science. I knew the answers lie in the research. And that's what attracted me to Minerva. It really is the foundation is evidence-based practices that have been shown to reduce inequities as well, that impact students, underrepresented students more. And that's what made me come to Minerva and grow with Minerva.
And now grow the model to many other universities as well. So this is my last question. Please start thinking about questions for the panelists. This is a really amazing group. So this is actually for just half the panel, but while the US and Indian edtech markets are really quite mature, over the past 3 years, we've seen a humongous growth in the European edtech system. And we have 2 British entrepreneurs in this space, and I'd love just to ask you both to speak a little bit about, or I guess you're Belgian, but British, anyway, speak a little bit about what it's been like being in Europe during the last 2 years have seen a tripling in funding, more unicorns, more rounds, more investors. It's been a real burgeoning. I'm curious how you've experienced that.
Yeah, do you want to lead or? Yeah, sure. So when I started Perlego kind of 3-4 years ago, no one wanted to invest in edtech, and it was a very unsexy industry. Just to share some numbers, in kind of 2014, a total of $270 million had been invested in edtech. Last year it was $2.5 billion in Europe alone. So really growing through the roof. And I think what's really exciting is we're starting to see some big companies come out of Europe. There's a lot of funding invested in Europe, and I think it's a great time to launch a company in Europe as well. So I can just see the difference in how many companies are coming out of accelerators. There's a real investment going on in education, so I think it's really exciting. I'm almost a bit jealous because I had to like pitch my heart out to get funding, and now these guys come and they just raise like that. So. But just generally, yeah, I think it's just a super exciting time.
Yeah. And Jack, I know FourthRev is headquartered in Malderen, so you can speak about Europe or rest of world, as they call it in Holland-IQ.
Yeah, we founded FourthRev in Melbourne, and I think a lot of the education systems we focus on across Australia, the UK, and North America, Canada, they have a lot of similarities. Their higher ed is at least partially marketized. Costs have been going up. The economies are suffering from similar digital skills, talent gaps. Some of those lifelong learning needs are very apparent across all of them. We work with universities in all of those systems and see very similar trends. I think it's quite interesting looking at Europe, I was back and I'm based in London now and speaking increasingly to universities in Europe and looking at those systems where still typically costs are typically borne by the state. It's still very unusual for someone to invest in their own education, and even outside of undergraduate study, if you're looking at boot camps and things, the majority of successful models in Europe and on continental Europe are government funded. So it's a very different system, and in terms of figuring out business models and partnership models that work there, it makes a lot more sense for us to sort of focus across those Commonwealth and North American systems, which are, many more similarities across them.
Interesting. I know that some of the Nordic countries actually allow students to transfer between countries. If you get into school in Sweden, you can transfer to a school in Norway. It reminds me a little of what Rize is doing. So do we have any questions from the audience? We know we have a lot of higher ed people in the room and a lot of people interested in innovation in various ways.
Thanks very much to the panelists. I'm interested in what you had to say about the impact on the universities you work with. What about the impact of the employers that you work with, and what are you seeing in terms of the pressure coming from employers to change what universities are doing? In particular, accreditation really ultimately means degree, and degree is valuable if employers are asking for it more so than if they aren't. So are you seeing that continuum? What are you seeing the latest and greatest in terms of employer impact on what they're, on that demand side, what they're looking for from graduates?
So I think that, as we say, universities are still the primary pathway into the professions, and I think if you look at the bootcamp market, that might be getting up to sort of 2 or 3 billion this year, whereas the online postgraduate market alone is around 75 billion. And so there's still clearly, from students and also employers, looking at those accreditations and degrees and university signals of quality, and that remains to be something of primary importance. However, there is a much, much greater focus on skills, capabilities, and demonstrable experience through project portfolios and that side of things that I think is most interesting to employers. And if you're looking at an adult population, learner population that we serve, a lot of those are already bachelor degree qualified, sometimes more as well, but they're looking to upskill or reskill to access new opportunities in the digital economy that people are going to have to do throughout their careers. And I don't think that employers are expecting them necessarily to go through accredited programs again, but they want signals of rigor and quality that they can rely on that helps them identify those candidates more quickly. So it doesn't have to be a degree qualification, but if it comes from a university or an institution that they know well and respect, I think that certainly serves the candidate very well in the jobs market.
Yeah, we partner with corporations, not nearly to the extent that FourthRev does, but I think, and only at the traditional undergraduate level for the most part. And I think, unlike the adult market, employers are definitely focused on getting more practical experience, and especially in the form of sort of like case studies and corporate projects that they can even provide into the classrooms. But I want to be hesitant to overstate their willingness to work there in the traditional undergraduate realm. I think when you're reskilling people and really where the skill set is like the primary piece of the puzzle that the employer is trying to get into that classroom, which is much more the case at the non-trad market or the adult market, relative to the institutions we work with, employers still want to see a much more well-rounded education. Liberal arts are still largely at the core of what we hear them wanting us to focus on and what they want our institutions to focus on. It's more so just coming in with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, incremental classes that make sure you don't just have that liberal arts core, but you also have some practical work experience that you can show via a portfolio or something like that. So I don't think their involvement is nearly as comprehensive as it would be at like the adult market, but obviously still extremely important.
And Abha, I know that the Minerva Project graduates are now, the first Minerva University graduates, I should say, are now out in the workforce. I'm curious if you've seen any feedback from employers based on their learning that is now informing what you do.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, even before we graduated students, experiential learning, internships are a very important part of the Minerva experience. And across the board, we heard great feedback about our students and how they were doing at these professional experiences. Our students are doing really well. I'm just going to give you an anecdotal example. Our student Alberto is here, part of ASU+GSV, co-founder of the Transcend Network, Forbes 30 under 30. So the example speaks for itself.
I can also add that we've actually been the recipient of a Minerva intern, and it was also a fantastic experience, some great work and some great outcomes.
I agree. Everybody I've met from Minerva has been amazing. Do you have anything to add to that, Gauthier, about employers?
So I can comment as someone who's employing people myself. I don't think the university degree is relevant anymore, to be honest. And we want to have the most diverse pool of people. And some of our best people never went to university. And I see it more and more like, I saw a note from BCG there they don't require a university degree on accreditation anymore. So I think just it's important, depending if you're like studying medicine or something. But for example, as a tech company, it's much more practical experience. I'd say passion and hunger to learn. That's much more important. So yeah, we don't require it anymore, and I think it's really opened up our talent pool both internationally, and then I'm really surprised about the skill sets of people that come in.
Strong stance. Very interesting.
Yeah, can we add to? And I think we agree. We look at the different topics that we'd offer potentially through our models, and we think that some of them have greater value or relevance through a university offering. If you're offering a data science and AI program, then prospective employers might associate greater, that more greatly with a university and some of the cutting edge academic side of things. If you're offering a front-end dev program, for example, or something that's more skills-based, then it might be less associated with a really academic institution. I think it's interesting with a BCG or someone, you're going to struggle to find many people in BCG that don't have degrees, and so obviously these things don't change overnight, but there's, again, that commentary versus what we're still seeing in the market.
Yeah, but there seems to be beginning to be openness from employers. This has been a phenomenal panel. I'm sorry we don't have time for more questions, but please follow up with this group out in the hallway. They're amazing. Please, thank you.